Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Sometimes we meet our friends in the strangest ways. I was working late at Ligonier Ministries. I had just recently graduated from seminary. My title at that point, I believe, was editorial assistant on the Table Talk team, and there was no one else around the office, and I happened, as I was walking around the office, to see a box full of magazines. This was on the desk of one of the ladies who was working in the marketing department. And I happened to catch my eye caught on the title of one of the magazines. It was called Homeschooling Digest. And I picked it up and I took it home and I began to read through this little magazine. Now, I was already committed to homeschooling, but I was profoundly unaware of so many of those other sort of cultural markers that tend to go along with homeschooling. But reading through this magazine, I was introduced to all these new ideas. Now, it's my hope and my prayer that very soon I'll have as a guest on the podcast, particularly on a Gospel at Work segment, Israel Wayne, whose mother, Skeet Savage, is the producer of this magazine. But instead, today I want to talk about a friend that I found in that magazine. His name is Pat Hurd. And if I remember correctly, Homeschooling Digest had rerun a column he had written for another magazine called Quit You Like Men. That's the name of a magazine. And Pat was an accountant and a father of many and a homeschooling dad, and he had a writing style that was engaging, and I just really enjoyed him and appreciated it. Felt like he's ahead of me on the curve on these things, and he's a great person to teach me. And then in God's providence, maybe a few months later, I happened to be speaking in another state and ended up having lunch with Pat and several others and getting to know him face to face. Over the course of the years, we ran into each other multiple times. Pat and I served together on sessions where I served as a help to the session that he was serving on. He and I both spoke at a couple of events together, and I got to know his family, and he was so normal while at the same time teaching me things that were so not normal. That is, he was interested in encouraging husbands to lead their families. He was interested in teaching the value and importance of homeschooling. He was raising up godly seed. And in that sense, again, very strange. But in terms of just interpersonal relationships, sense of humor, he was just a profoundly regular guy. He is from Texas, and I don't think this is quite fair, but what some people might call a good old boy. Now, he's a lot more sophisticated than a good old boy. He's a smart man. And, he's also a very tender man. When I had my OWI, there were very few people that stayed in contact with me and checked to see how I was doing. There were some, but not very many, and Pat was one of them. And I always felt when he was calling to check on me that he wasn't calling to check up on me in the sense of he was looking to get inside dope to put into the rumor mill, but rather he was concerned for me. I've really enjoyed Pat. I've enjoyed his children. I've enjoyed his wife. I've enjoyed just the whole family. They live out in the brush and the bramble of central Texas, and I admired him at first. That's a good way to put it. When you get to become friends with people that you admire, isn't that a blessing? Isn't that really just an encouragement? Now, I haven't seen Pat or talked to Pat in a couple of years, but I know he's out there. I know where his head's at because he's steady. And I know he's a man of compassion, a man of concern, that he's got a profoundly pastoral heart. And I continue to look up to him. I continue to give thanks for him. He was with me and beside me through some very difficult times, and I had the privilege of serving him in much the same way. And he, in the midst of struggle and difficulty, always remained steady. That's what I love about Pat Hurd. Some of you may have read his columns from back in the day in Quit You Like Men magazine. Some of you may actually know Pat. Some of you may be at the church where he serves. I'm going to be able to track him down and get him a copy of this segment. And I'm going to remind you once again, I want you to do this for your friends. I want you first to invest time in thinking about the people that God has blessed you with, even if you're mad at them now, even if you're not friends with them anymore, even if you've lost touch. Just think about how God blessed you with them and through them, and then find a way to reach out, make contact, and let them know. Pat, I remain grateful for you, and I continue to admire you. It's time once again for another one of our Curating Your Book Library segments, and as I was thinking through what book would I like to cover for today, it dawned on me that it has been quite some time since I have encouraged the reading of any of the wonderful, wonderful books by C.S. Lewis. I venture to guess that if I were to really spend a good day being very careful to list out my top 10 books that I've ever read of any kind, C.S. Lewis would have more on that list than any other author. I can think of 3 right off the top of my head that would certainly be on the list, and there's probably more. That's significant. I have, in moments of great honesty, affirmed that if you were to measure the influence of merely human, non-apostolic people on my life, at least people that I have read, C.S. Lewis would also certainly be in the top 5, even though he doesn't share a lot of my theological commitments, which brings us to his book, The Screwtape Letters. It is a wonderful, delightful book that caused Lewis great pain in writing it. And it is one of those books that reveals the great strength of Lewis. In case you're unaware, the basic premise is this, that the book is a series of letters written by a senior demon to a junior demon, which junior demon is assigned the task of harming, redirecting, harassing a human person. And we get to watch that person's life through the lens of the letters from this senior demon. And one of the reasons that Lewis described this as being so painful to write is that he had to sort of put himself in an inverted, upside down world, a world, the demonic realm where good is bad and bad is good. He refers to the devil, I believe, as his infernal lowness, something like that. And that was kind of one of the challenges. But I think the other part of the challenge is where Lewis has to get into the thought processes that lead us astray and lead us into sin. And again, that to me is just the magic of the book, because Lewis has such profound insight into what and who we are. Let me say this also, to credit him. I'm also tickled pink that Lewis had the wisdom and the foresight to look at our enemy, the army of the seed of the serpent, as a kind of bland bureaucracy. That this is not something epic. It's just blah. When I'm reading it, I'm seeing those school desks that teachers used to have, the big heavy metal things, and banged up file cabinets and cinder block walled offices in hell. That's the kind of feeling that you get. So there's that to praise it too. But what I'm trying to get at is this: Lewis shows not only the ordinariness of the devil, but the ordinariness of sin. We have a tendency, and this is part of the craftiness of the devil, to think of great sin as that sin which topples empires, or that sin which is, completely a life of dissipation, like the prodigal son lived. And what we see is that these great sins often manifest in very ordinary ways. I can think of one of the examples therein where the patient, that's what the human is called in the story, the patient's mother is charged with being gluttonous. Now, she was not overweight. She did not eat more than she should. She was not given to wild parties of eating and drinking. Lewis said that shows that her gluttony comes in her persnicketyness, that she tries to not make a fuss, but she's just frustrated that no one knows how to make a proper piece of toast anymore. And this idea that she alone knows how to make toast is evidence of something unhealthy inside of her. And what's supposed to happen as you read this is it's supposed to show us things that are unhealthy in ourselves. That's a very useful book. Just like fairy tales might be used to get past our guard against the gospel, so this sort of dark fairy tale can be used to get past our defenses in recognizing the depth and the scope of our own sin. I really want to commend your reading of it. There are a number of different versions where you can listen to it. One done by the inimitable John Cleese from the Monty Python troupe, and at least one more done by my friend Max McLean, who had a one-man show on this on Broadway. So please check out C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters. It's a short read. It's an easy read. And let me know what you think. Maybe you've already read it. And if you have, I'd also love to know what you think. If you haven't, just get it. It'll take you an hour, and maybe an hour and a half, and it could change your life. Al Gore says he invented it. Microsoft Explorer discovered it. AOL mailed it in. But Google gave the internet legs. It serves as the roadmap that makes the information superhighway navigable. Google helps you find stuff, which means, sadly, that it also gives directions to the dark side of town. Whether it's porn or gossip, Google knows where to go. Internet assassins can overcome their virtual invisibility by tying their star to someone more recognizable and then lynching them. I know it's shocking, but it can be done. Trust me. Google then invites the curious in, and we're all given a tin horn that reads, Deputy Vigilante. Despite that hard reality, it can be used for good. Google enabled me to track down a dear old friend that I've now been praying for years. It has found for me sundry YouTube tutorials that taught me how to unstick my four-wheel drive and how to clean the inside of my ventless fireplace. Google has also been good enough to track down important information, like what the final score was of the first college football game I ever went to. For those of you who care, Pitt beat Temple 35-24, with sophomore tailback Tony Dorsett rushing for over 100 yards. Which got me to thinking about people it would have been impossible to reach pre-Google. Not long ago, I used this handy tool to track down a classmate of mine from junior high school. This particular classmate, I'm sorry to say, was teased quite a bit. I'm even more sorry to say that not only did I not stick up for him, but I participated in the cruelty. Google helped me track him down. He is now a highly respected attorney, and he had an email address. I wrote him an apology, repenting for the ways in which I had wronged him, and he, nearly 30 years later, graciously forgave me. In like manner, as I started working on my book, The Call to Wonder, largely inspired by G.K. Chesterton, I remembered that one of my college professors had taught during a fantasy lit class that both Tolkien and Lewis were driven by a profound sense of wonder, a sense I believe they may have learned at the feet of Chesterton. During the class, I had no idea what my professor was talking about. 20 years later, it started making sense to me. I thought he might be encouraged to know that the wisdom he planted 20 years ago was bearing fruit not only in my life, but in the lives of those who were reading my book. That professor, Dr. James Dixon, was acknowledged in the book. But Google enabled me to let him actually know that. Google helped me track down another influential professor in my life to thank her, Kathy Van Til. She passed on to his reward a few days ago. I'm blessed to know that I was able to thank her before her homegoing. So here's a suggestion. Use Google for good. Find someone that you have lost that is either owed an apology or a thanks. Better yet, do both. Be as specific as you can, both as you repent and as you give thanks. You may heal old wounds. You may put wind under someone's wings. You will bless someone else. I'm guessing you'll be glad you did, and so bless yourself. And then, do it again. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. and join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.